A woman with exactly $20 to her name was about to save the life of a billionaire who was actively destroying hers. Neither of them knew it yet, but in exactly 24 hours, their worlds would collide on a dark, rain-soaked highway, proving that sometimes the only thing standing between a corporate empire and total collapse is a single act of irrational human decency. Let's start with the math of poverty. It's not abstract, it's exact. Sarah Hayes owed $1,850. At $1,850. That was the exact number printed in bold black ink on the bright neon orange paper taped to her apartment door. A 3-day notice to pay or quit. It's a legal mechanism designed to turn a human being into a trespassing statistic. The notice cited state civil codes. It didn't care about a dead husband. It didn't care about a sick child. The law operates in black and white, leaving the poor to drown in the gray. The 3 days were up tomorrow at 8 a.m. When the sun came up, the county sheriffs would arrive. They wouldn't knock softly. They would bring heavy boots, clipboards, and the absolute authority to carry Sarah's life out onto the sidewalk in cardboard boxes. Sarah sat at her tiny kitchen table. The apartment was freezing. The building's management company had stopped fixing the radiators 3 months ago, right around the time the rumors started. Rumors that Vanguard Horizon, a multi-billion-dollar development firm, was buying up the entire zip code to bulldoze it and build luxury eco-condos. The rumors were true, but Sarah didn't know the name of Vanguard's CEO. She didn't care. She only cared about the sound coming from the bedroom, a shallow, whistling, wheezing sound. Her 7-year-old son, Leo. Leo had asthma, not the mild kind. The kind that tightens the chest like a vice when the temperature drops and the stress levels rise. His rescue inhaler was empty. A refill cost exactly $20 out of pocket with her substandard warehouse insurance. Sarah reached into the pocket of her faded work jacket and pulled out a single, crumpled $20 bill. It was her entire net worth. Every cent she had left after paying for groceries, electricity, and the bus pass that got her to her $14 an hour job at the logistics center. $20. It couldn't pay the $1,850 to rent. It couldn't stop the sheriffs. But it could buy the inhaler that would let Leo breathe. It would let him sleep through their last night under a roof. She smoothed the bill out on the table, stared at it. If you looked at Sarah's living room, you wouldn't see a woman who belonged at the bottom of the social ladder. You would see the walls, and the walls were magnificent. Every square inch of cheap peeling wallpaper was covered in drafting paper. Architectural blueprints, complex, mathematically flawless designs for high-density, low-cost urban housing. 3 years ago, Sarah was 2 semesters away from a master's degree in urban architecture. She had the highest GPA in her cohort. She saw buildings not as investments, but as living ecosystems. Then her husband died, suddenly. A heart defect nobody caught. He left behind a mountain of medical debt, a grieving widow, and a 4-year-old boy. The university didn't accept grief as a form of tuition payment. So Sarah dropped out. She traded her drafting compass for a box cutter. She traded the bright design studio for the brutal night shift at a fulfillment center, loading pallets from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But she never stopped drawing. At night, when Leo was asleep, she designed the kind of homes people like her deserved. Homes that couldn't be taken away by an orange piece of paper. The wheezing from the bedroom grew slightly louder, a sharp pulling sound. Sarah checked her watch. 8:45 p.m. Her double shift started in just over an hour. She folded the $20 bill and carefully tucked it into her front right pocket. She would go to the 24-hour pharmacy on her way home from the warehouse at dawn. She would buy the inhaler, give it to Leo, and then sit on the floor and wait for the sheriffs to break the lock. She had a plan for survival. A bleak, terrifying plan, but a plan nonetheless. What she didn't know was that 40 miles away, in a penthouse suite overlooking the city skyline, the architect of her misery was looking at a map of her neighborhood. Evelyn Harper, the founder and CEO of Vanguard Horizon, a woman worth $3.8 billion. Evelyn was tracing a manicured fingernail over the exact block where Sarah lived. She was a woman who demanded perfection. She demanded speed. And she had just decided that tomorrow she was going to drive down to that neighborhood to see the demolition zone for herself. Two women. One fighting for her son's breath. One fighting for corporate dominance. Separated by a canyon of wealth, but connected by a single, dark highway. The timer had started. The storm was rolling in. And those $20 in Sarah's pocket were about to become the most expensive currency in the world. Stay with me, because the choice Sarah makes on that highway will break your heart and change everything you thought you knew about the price of kindness. At 9:15 p.m., Sarah locked the deadbolt of her apartment. She paused in the hallway, pressing her ear against the thin door. The wheezing from inside was steady. Leo was asleep, but it was a fragile, dangerous sleep. She pressed her hand against her jacket pocket. The crumpled $20 bill was still there. Then she turned and walked down the stairs into the cold. The logistics warehouse was a concrete cavern that smelled of wet cardboard and diesel exhaust. 10 p.m. Sarah punched her time card. The job was brutally simple. Lift, scan, load, repeat. For the next 8 hours, she moved 40-pound boxes of consumer goods. Blenders, flat-screen TVs, designer shoes. Items she was loading into delivery trucks, but could never afford to buy. The scanner in her hand beeped. 11:42 p.m. With every beep, Sarah's mind ran the numbers. The terrible, suffocating math of poverty. She had spent the last 3 days trying to perform a financial miracle. She had gone to a payday lender on 4th Street. The man behind the bulletproof glass had looked at her pay stubs, typed on his keyboard, and shaken his head. "Your debt-to-income ratio is maxed out," he'd said. Even at a predatory 400% interest rate, Sarah was too poor to exploit. She had called the county emergency housing hotline. She waited on hold for 47 minutes, listening to a recorded loop about community resources. When a tired voice finally answered, it was only to tell her the Emergency Rental Assistance Fund had been drained since November. She had even tried to sell her wedding ring at a local pawn shop. The appraiser had squinted through his jeweler's loop and offered her $80. $80 for the only physical proof of the best years of her life. She had taken the ring back and walked out. Why ain't that $850? It might as well have been $1 million. The scanner beeped again. 5 a.m. Her back screamed. Her fingers were numb inside her cheap work gloves. But physical pain was a luxury she couldn't afford. The only thing that mattered was the ticking clock. In exactly 3 hours, the county sheriffs would arrive at her door. Outside, the storm had finally broken. It wasn't just rain. It was a torrential downpour. Sheets of water slammed against the corrugated metal roof of the warehouse like artillery fire. 6:01 a.m. The shift buzzer sounded. Sarah clocked out. $14 an hour. 8 hours. She had just traded her physical health for a little over $100 that wouldn't even clear her bank account until next Friday. 30 miles away, in the Vanguard Horizon Executive Suite, Evelyn Harper poured her first cup of black coffee. Sleep was for people who didn't have to manage a global real estate empire. Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the legal documents stacked neatly on her mahogany desk. Sector 4 demolition. Sarah's neighborhood. Evelyn was a hands-on CEO. She didn't trust drone footage. She didn't trust project managers who padded their reports with buzzwords to look good. She wanted to see the rot of the neighborhood herself before her bulldozers erased it. But she couldn't take the company Bentley. Driving a $500,000 car into a poverty-stricken zip code was a magnet for bad press and unwanted attention. Instead, she took the keys to an unmarked 10-year-old sedan from the corporate security fleet. No driver, no security detail, just her. Evelyn walked out into the private underground garage. She was used to controlling everything: the market, the board members, the politicians who signed her zoning permits. But nobody controls the weather. Back at the warehouse, Sarah walked out into the freezing rain. Her car, a rusted 2004 sedan with a cracked taillight, was waiting in the far corner of the employee lot. She got in. The engine sputtered, choked, and finally roared to life. The heater blew lukewarm air that smelled like dust. She had one mission now: drive to the 24-hour pharmacy on Route 9, buy the inhaler with her last $20, go home, give her son his breath back, and wait for the eviction. She pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the highway. The road was a slick, dangerous ribbon of black asphalt. Visibility was almost zero. The windshield wipers beat a frantic, useless rhythm against the glass. Most sensible people were off the roads. But Evelyn Harper was not most people, and neither was Sarah Hayes. Two cars, one driving to buy breath for a dying child, one driving to survey a conquered territory. They were 10 miles apart, and the gap was closing fast. Evelyn Harper was not used to being helpless. In her world, power was insulation. It bought distance from the cold, from the rain, from the physical realities that governed everyone else. If she was too warm, a thermostat was adjusted. If she was late, a helicopter was chartered. But power cannot prevent a bald tire from striking a jagged piece of highway debris at 60 miles an hour. The sound was like a gunshot. The 10-year-old corporate security sedan violently jerked to the right. The steering wheel fought her, spinning wildly as the right front tire shredded into pieces of black rubber. Evelyn slammed on the brakes, fighting the skid. The car careened off the asphalt, sliding into the thick, freezing mud of the shoulder before shuddering to a violent halt. Silence. Only the deafening roar of the rain against the roof. Evelyn exhaled a shaky breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't the CEO of Vanguard Horizon. She was just a 71-year-old woman sitting alone in the dark. She reached into her designer coat and pulled out her phone. No service. She stared at the screen. The severe storm had knocked out the local cell towers. She had $3.8 billion in equity, a team of dedicated fixers on retainer, and a contacts list full of senators. And none of it mattered. Right now, all that wealth couldn't buy a single bar of cellular signal. She pushed the hazard light button. The orange blinking cast long, eerie shadows across the flooded highway. She locked the doors, pulled her coat tighter, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. 3 cars drove by. None of them slowed down. People driving on Route 9 at 6:30 in the morning during a torrential downpour have their own problems. They don't stop for strangers. Then, a pair of dim, uneven headlights cut through the rain. Sarah Hayes was gripping her steering wheel, leaning forward to see through the windshield. Her defroster was broken, and she had to wipe the condensation away with her bare, freezing hand. She was exactly 3 miles away from the pharmacy. Through the relentless sheets of rain, she saw the blinking orange lights on the shoulder. She saw the dark sedan tilting heavily to the right, and as she got closer, her headlights illuminated the driver, an elderly woman clutching a coat, staring out the window with an expression of quiet terror. Sarah's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Keep driving. That's what her survival instinct screamed. She was exhausted. She was freezing. She had an eviction notice waiting for her, and a 7-year-old boy fighting for breath. She had exactly $20 in her pocket, and she needed every second, every ounce of energy to get that inhaler and get home. Keep driving. It's not your problem. Sarah pressed the gas. Her car surged forward, passing the broken-down sedan. But as she looked in the rearview mirror, watching the hazard lights fade into the red glow of her taillights, a voice echoed in her head. It was her father's voice, a man who had worked construction his whole life, building beautiful homes he could never afford to live in. A man who had died with nothing in his bank account, but a neighborhood full of people at his funeral. "A home isn't walls, Sarah," he used to tell her. "It's people who don't walk past each other. The day you walk past someone in the dirt is the day you lose your foundation." Sarah hit the brakes. Her rusted car skidded slightly on the wet asphalt. She sat there in the middle of the empty highway, the rain pounding on her roof. She thought about her son. She thought about the $20. She shifted the car into reverse. Evelyn watched in disbelief as the rusted 2004 sedan backed up through the storm and parked directly behind her. The driver's side door opened. A woman stepped out into the freezing downpour. She wasn't wearing a raincoat, just a faded, thin warehouse jacket and cheap work boots. Sarah walked up to Evelyn's window and tapped on the glass. Evelyn hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. She had spent her entire career learning to view people as liabilities, as threats to the bottom line. But looking at the shivering woman standing in the rain, Evelyn rolled the window down an inch. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked, yelling to be heard over the storm. "No," Evelyn said, her voice tighter than she wanted it to be. "Front right tire. It blew out. I don't have cell service." "Nobody does out here in a storm," Sarah said, water streaming down her face. "Pop the trunk. Let's see if you have a spare." Evelyn pulled the latch. Sarah walked to the back of the sedan and lifted the trunk. She pulled up the floor mat. Empty. It was a corporate security fleet car. The spare tire had been removed months ago to make room for radio equipment that was no longer there. Sarah slammed the trunk shut and walked back to Evelyn's window. "You don't have a spare," Sarah said, wiping the rain from her eyes. "And you can't stay here. The temperature is dropping, and a semi-truck won't see you in this visibility until it's too late." Evelyn looked at her. "What are my options?" Sarah looked down the highway toward the pharmacy, then back at the billionaire she didn't know. She felt the crumpled $20 bill in her pocket. The weight of it felt like an anvil. "There's a gas station about a mile back," Sarah said. "They sell emergency tire sealant and cheap jacks. I'm going to go buy them. Keep your doors locked until I get back." "Wait," Evelyn said. She reached into her purse, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. "Let me give you the money for it." She opened the wallet. It was full of black titanium credit cards, not a single dollar bill. Billionaires don't carry cash. Sarah looked at the plastic cards, then back at Evelyn's eyes. "They only take cash when the power grid flickers," Sarah said quietly. Before Evelyn could say another word, Sarah turned her back to the storm, walked to her rusted car, and drove away. She was heading back the way she came, to spend her son's breathing money on a stranger. The bell above the gas station door chimed. Sarah walked in, dripping freezing rain onto the linoleum. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone. She walked straight to the auto supply aisle. She didn't have time to browse. She found what she needed on the bottom shelf. A heavy-duty aerosol tire sealant, $12. A cheap portable scissor jack, $8. With tax, it was $21.40. Sarah carried the items to the counter. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled $20 bill, the money for Leo's breath. "I have exactly 20, Sarah said, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Can you waive the tax?" The clerk looked up, annoyed, but then he really looked at her. He saw the faded warehouse jacket soaked through to the lining. He saw the profound exhaustion in her eyes. He saw her hands shaking uncontrollably. He sighed, took the $20 bill, and slid the items across the counter. The transaction was complete. The safety net was gone. Sarah walked back out into the storm. 10 minutes later, her rusted sedan pulled up behind Evelyn's crippled car on the highway. Evelyn watched through the rain-streaked glass as this stranger, a woman who had absolutely nothing to gain, walked back into the freezing downpour. Sarah didn't knock on the window this time. She went straight to work. She knelt in the mud on the shoulder of the highway. The freezing water soaked instantly through her thin jeans, chilling her to the bone. Her fingers, already numb from the 8-hour warehouse shift, fumbled with the cheap metal of the scissor jack. It was a brutal, physical task, Every turn of the crank demanded energy her body didn't have. Her muscles burned, her knuckles scraped against the wet asphalt, drawing a thin line of blood that washed away instantly in the rain. Inside the warm, leather-upholstered cabin, Evelyn Harper watched. Evelyn had built a $3.8 billion empire by understanding human motivation. People did things for money, for power, or for leverage. Everything was a transaction. But she was watching a woman bleed in the freezing mud for a total stranger, with zero expectation of return. It violated every rule of the corporate world. The car lifted. Sarah connected the sealant nozzle to the shredded tire's valve, emptying the aerosol can to temporarily inflate and seal the rubber just enough to make it drivable at low speeds. She lowered the jack, tossed the empty can into her trunk, and walked to Evelyn's window. Evelyn rolled it down. The bitter cold rushed in. "It's not a permanent fix!" Sarah yelled over the roar of the rain, her teeth chattering. "But it'll hold pressure for about 20 miles if you keep it under 30 miles an hour. That's enough to get you to the service station just past the county line." Evelyn looked at the woman. Her clothes were ruined. Her hands were covered in grease, mud, and blood. "Get in your car and follow me to the service station," Evelyn commanded, her CEO instincts taking over. "I'll use their landline to call my bank. I am going to compensate you for this, generously." Sarah shook her head. "I can't. I have to go home." "Then give me your name," Evelyn insisted, her voice rising with a strange, unfamiliar desperation. "Your phone number, your address. Let me write you a check when the grid comes back." Sarah looked at Evelyn. She didn't see a billionaire. She just saw an old woman who was safe now. "Keep your money," Sarah said. "Why?" Evelyn asked, genuinely bewildered. "You just spent your own money. You ruined your clothes. Why are you doing this for nothing?" Sarah stood in the downpour. She thought about her son, gasping for air in a freezing bedroom. She thought about the neon orange eviction notice waiting on her door. And she thought about her father. "Because a home isn't just walls," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "It's people who don't walk past each other. If I leave you out here, I lose everything that makes me who I am. Get home safe, ma'am." Sarah didn't wait for a response. She turned, walked back to her rusted car, and got in. Evelyn Harper sat in stunned silence. She watched the red taillights of the old sedan pull away, fading into the relentless rain until they were completely gone. For the first time in her life, the CEO of Vanguard Horizon realized that there were debts her money simply could not pay. Down the highway, Sarah was driving back into the dark. She had done the right thing. She had saved a life. But as she gripped the steering wheel, shivering uncontrollably, reality crashed back down on her. She had no inhaler. She had no money. And the sheriffs were coming in exactly 2 hours. Evelyn drove exactly 28 miles an hour. The steering wheel vibrated violently in her hands. Every bump in the asphalt threatened to blow the temporary seal the stranger had applied in the freezing mud. It took her 45 agonizing minutes to reach the county line. The neon sign of a 24-hour service station cut through the storm like a lighthouse. Evelyn pulled under the canopy, put the car in park, and walked into the brightly lit convenience store. She didn't look like a woman worth nearly $4 billion. She looked like a survivor. Her designer coat was ruined, her shoes were covered in mud, and her hands were trembling. She walked to the counter and asked to use the landline. She dialed a number she knew by heart. "Vance," she said, the moment the line connected. David Vance was Vanguard Horizon's head of corporate security. He was paid an exorbitant salary to ensure problems disappeared before they reached the board of directors. "Ms. Harper," Vance's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Where are you? We lost your vehicle's GPS signal an hour ago." "I'm at the Route 9 service station," Evelyn said. Her voice was already regaining its usual sharp authority. "Send a recovery team for the vehicle. And Vance, I need you to find someone." She didn't have a name. She didn't have a license plate. All she had was the description of a rusted 2004 sedan with a cracked taillight, a woman in a faded warehouse jacket, and the exact time and location of the encounter. "Pull the Department of Transportation highway camera feeds," Evelyn ordered. "Check the surveillance footage at the gas station 3 miles back. Find the transaction records. I want a name and an address on my desk by noon." "Understood," Vance said. "No questions asked." Evelyn hung up. She stood in the harsh fluorescent light, waiting for the fleet of black SUVs that would soon arrive to escort her back to her penthouse. The corporate armor was back on. But the crack in her worldview remained. 40 miles away, Sarah was completely out of time. 7:15 a.m. Sarah turned the key to her apartment. The door swung open. The air inside was stale and freezing. She walked straight to the bedroom. Leo was still asleep, but his chest was working far too hard. The wheezing was sharper now, a terrible rhythmic rasp that filled the silent room. Sarah knelt beside his bed. She had nothing to give him, no medicine, no money. In 45 minutes, she wouldn't even have a roof to put over his head. She rested her forehead against the edge of his mattress and closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, since her husband's heart had simply stopped beating, Sarah let the tears fall. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying, the silent, suffocating kind. The kind that happens when you have done everything right, worked every shift, sacrificed everything you had, and the math of survival still breaks you. But crying wouldn't pack the boxes. Sarah stood up. She wiped her face, walked into the kitchen, and pulled a stack of flattened cardboard boxes from behind the refrigerator. She began folding them, taping the bottoms. The sharp sound of ripping packing tape echoed off the walls covered in her architectural blueprints. The beautiful, mathematically flawless dreams of urban housing that she had designed in the dark. She started pulling the drawings down, one by one, rolling them into tight cylinders. 7:45 a.m. The rain outside had slowed to a steady, depressing drizzle. Sarah woke Leo up. She dressed him in his warmest sweater and wrapped a thick wool scarf around his mouth and nose to filter the cold air and ease his lungs. She didn't tell him they were being kicked out. She told him they were going on an adventure. 8 a.m. The heavy, undeniable sound of boots echoed in the hallway outside. 3 sets of footsteps, stopping in unison. Then came the knock. Loud, authoritative. The sound of the state demanding its property back. Sarah looked at the door. Her pulse pounded in her throat. She gripped Leo's small hand tightly in hers. The time was up. Sarah opened the door. 2 county deputies stood in the dimly lit hallway. Behind them was a man in a cheap, poorly fitted suit holding a clipboard, the representative from the property management company. "Sarah Hayes?" the lead deputy asked. His voice wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was entirely indifferent. He had said these exact words to hundreds of people. He was just a gear in the machine. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I have a writ of possession ordered by the court. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather any essential personal items and vacate the premises. After that, the locks will be changed, and your remaining property will be removed to the curb. 15 minutes. That was the legal time limit to erase 3 years of a life." Sarah didn't argue. Arguing with the state was a luxury for people who could afford lawyers. She looked down at Leo, who was clutching her leg, his small chest rising and falling with that terrible rhythmic wheeze. She squeezed his hand. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "We're just going to wait outside." The deputies stepped inside. They didn't look at the beautiful architectural drawings rolled up in the corner. They didn't look at the empty refrigerator. They didn't look at the child struggling to breathe. They just started moving boxes. Down the hallway, neighbors opened their doors a fraction of an inch, watching through the cracks. It was the silent, collective trauma of the working poor. Everyone watching, everyone knowing they were only one missed emergency room visit, one broken car down from being the ones on the sidewalk. By 8:20 a.m., Sarah and Leo were standing outside in the freezing drizzle. A small pile of taped cardboard boxes sat on the wet concrete next to them. The sound of the deadbolt clicking shut echoed from the third floor. The safety net hadn't just broken. It had been dismantled and hauled away. At 11:30 a.m., David Vance knocked on the heavy oak doors of Evelyn Harper's penthouse office. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked in and placed a single, thin manila folder on the mahogany desk. Vance was the head of corporate security. He was paid to be efficient, not polite. "I found her," Vance said. Evelyn put down her reading glasses. "Walk me through it." The Department of Transportation cameras caught a partial plate on the rusted sedan leaving the highway. We cross-referenced the timestamp with the Route 9 gas station surveillance. The clerk confirmed a woman matching your description bought tire sealant and a scissor jack at 6:42 a.m. Vance paused, looking at his notes. She paid in cash, $21.40. The clerk remembered her because she asked him to waive the tax. She only had a $20 bill on her. Evelyn felt a sudden, sharp tightness in her chest. She remembered the woman's freezing, bleeding hands. She remembered offering her a credit card. They only take cash when the power grid flickers. "We ran the plate," Vance continued, oblivious to the shift in his boss's demeanor. "Her name is Sarah Hayes, 32 years old, widowed, works the night shift at a logistics warehouse. No criminal record. Clean driving history." Evelyn opened the folder. The first page was a DMV photo of the woman from the highway. Tired eyes, proud posture. The second page was a background report. Evelyn scanned the document, her eyes darting across the text until she reached the section labeled Current Residence. She stopped breathing. She read the address once, then again. 412 East Alder Street, Apartment 3B, Sector 4. "Vance," Evelyn said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "This address." "Yes, ma'am," Vance nodded, consulting his tablet. "It's a low-income housing unit. It actually falls under our current acquisition zone for the Sector 4 luxury eco-condo development. Vanguard Horizon owns the building." Evelyn's hands began to tremble, not from the cold this time. She flipped to the third page of the dossier. It was a flagged legal notice pulled from the county database, a document generated automatically by her own legal department, a 3-day notice to pay or quit. Debt amount, $1,150. Execution date, today, 8 a.m. Evelyn looked at the gold clock on her desk. It was 11:45 a.m. The woman who had just spent her last $20 kneeling in the freezing mud to save a stranger's life had been evicted by that exact stranger less than 4 hours later. Evelyn stood up so fast her heavy leather chair crashed to the floor. "Have my car brought around," Evelyn commanded. Her voice was lethal. "Now!" Sarah sat on a taped cardboard box. The rain had soaked through her jacket, chilling her skin, but she barely felt it. She was entirely focused on the small, fragile weight of her son leaning against her. Leo's breathing was worse. The cold, damp air was tightening his airways by the minute. He needed the medicine that was sitting on a shelf in a pharmacy, waiting for the $20 bill Sarah no longer had. She pulled him closer, trying to use her own body heat to shield him from the wind. Across the street, the property management representative was locking the front gate. He didn't look back. To him, the eviction was complete. The spreadsheet was updated. The unit was vacant. Sarah looked at her hands. The knuckles were still bruised and scraped from the cheap metal of the scissor jack. She had bled for a stranger in the dark, and now, in the daylight, she and her son were invisible. "Mom?" Leo whispered, his voice thin and raspy. "Where are we going to sleep?" Sarah closed her eyes. It was the question that broke parents, the question that stripped away every illusion of safety. "I'm figuring it out, baby," she lied smoothly. "Just rest for a minute." She had no phone. She had no money. She had a rusted car that was parked miles away in an employee lot. The shelter system in Sector 4 was overflowing. They were in free fall. Then, the sound of the street changed. It wasn't the slow, heavy rumble of a delivery truck or the rattle of an old sedan. It was the low, synchronized hum of massive, high-performance engines. 3 black Cadillac Escalades turned the corner, moving in a tight convoy. Their tinted windows reflected the gray, overcast sky. They didn't slow down for the speed bumps. They glided over them with the arrogant weight of extreme wealth. The convoy pulled up to the curb, directly in front of the low-income housing unit, directly in front of Sarah's wet cardboard boxes. Neighbors who had been watching the eviction from their windows suddenly stepped back into the shadows. The property manager, who had been walking toward his car, stopped dead in his tracks. The doors of the lead SUV opened. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, their eyes scanning the perimeter. Then, the rear door of the center vehicle swung open. A woman stepped out onto the wet pavement. She wasn't wearing a ruined coat anymore. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Sarah made in a year. Her posture was flawless. Her presence demanded absolute silence from the street. It was Evelyn Harper. Evelyn looked at the dilapidated building. She looked at the peeling paint, the broken windows, the rot that her company had purchased for pennies on the dollar. Then she looked down at the sidewalk. Sarah was still sitting on the cardboard box, holding her son. Her warehouse jacket was still stained with highway mud and tire grease. She looked up at the convoy, at the security detail, and finally at the woman stepping toward her. Recognition hit Sarah like a physical blow. It was the woman from the highway, the woman whose tire she had changed in the dead of night. Evelyn stopped 3 feet away from the boxes, the billionaire and the warehouse worker, face to face in the daylight. Evelyn looked at Sarah's bruised hands. She looked at the shivering little boy, listening to the terrible, sharp wheeze in his chest. And then she looked at the bright orange eviction notice sitting on top of a taped box. The CEO of Vanguard Horizon had spent her life making ruthless calculations. She had fired executives, crushed competitors, and acquired entire zip codes without losing a minute of sleep. But standing on the sidewalk, looking at the exact human cost of her empire, Evelyn's voice broke. "You gave me your last $20, Evelyn said. The words were heavy with disbelief and a deep, unfamiliar shame. You knew they were coming for your home this morning, and you still stopped in the rain." Sarah held her son tighter. She didn't stand up. She didn't look intimidated. She just looked tired. "I didn't stop for you," Sarah said quietly, the raspy wheeze of her son punctuating her words. "I stopped because if I didn't, I would be no better than the people who put me out here." Evelyn flinched. The words weren't meant as a weapon, but they cut deeper than any corporate litigation ever could. Evelyn Harper had dismantled entire corporations with a single sentence. She had silenced boardrooms filled with the most powerful men in the city. But standing on the wet concrete of Sector 4, she had absolutely nothing to say. Sarah's words hung in the freezing air. "I would be no better than the people who put me out here." Then, the silence was broken by a sound that every parent dreads more than anything in the world. It wasn't a cough. It was a terrifying, high-pitched gasp. Leo's hands flew to his throat. His eyes went wide with blind panic. The rhythmic wheezing that had been soundtracking the morning suddenly stopped. His airways, inflamed by the freezing rain, the lack of sleep, and the crushing stress of the eviction, had clamped completely shut. Sarah dropped to her knees on the wet sidewalk. "Leo! Leo, look at me!" She pulled him against her chest, trying to force him to slow his breathing, but the boy was suffocating. His lips were rapidly taking on a horrifying pale shade of blue. "Where is his medicine?" Evelyn yelled, her CEO instincts slicing through her paralysis. "Where is his inhaler?" Sarah looked up. Her face was a mask of absolute, unadulterated despair. "I didn't have enough." "What do you mean you didn't have enough?" Evelyn demanded, stepping closer, abandoning all pretense of personal space. Sarah's voice broke into a sob. "The copay was $20. I had the $20. But then I saw a woman broken down on the highway. The words hit Evelyn Harper with the force of a freight train. The crumpled $20 bill, the cheap tire sealant, the metal scissor jack. Sarah hadn't just sacrificed her time in the freezing mud. She hadn't just sacrificed her pride. She had sacrificed her own son's breath. And she had done it for the very woman who had ordered the bulldozers to her front door. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She didn't look at her security chief. She didn't look at the property manager who was staring at them in shock from the curb. "Vance!" Evelyn roared. Her voice echoed off the brick walls of the apartment building with terrifying, absolute authority. "Get the door open!" The head of corporate security lunged for the rear door of the armored Cadillac Escalade. Evelyn grabbed Sarah by the arm, her manicured hand gripping the wet, greasy fabric of the warehouse jacket. "Get him in the car, now!" Sarah was too terrified to argue. She scooped Leo's rigid body into her arms and scrambled into the back of the massive SUV. Evelyn climbed in right behind her, slamming the heavy armored door shut. "St. Jude Medical Center," Evelyn ordered the driver, slamming her hand against the partition. "Do not stop for lights. Do not stop for traffic. If someone is in your way, you ram them." The driver hit a switch on the center console. Hidden strobe lights in the Escalade's grille ignited, flashing a blinding emergency red and blue. The massive engine roared, the tires gripping the wet asphalt as the SUV launched forward, leaving the taped cardboard boxes sitting alone on the rain-soaked sidewalk. Inside the cabin, the contrast was violently absurd. The interior of the Escalade was a sanctuary of hand-stitched Italian leather, precision climate control, and soundproof glass. It was a mobile fortress, designed specifically to keep the ugly realities of the world safely outside. But the reality was bleeding into the leather. Sarah was rocking back and forth on the pristine seats, clutching her dying son, pleading with him to stay awake. Leo was fighting, his chest heaving violently, but his eyes were beginning to roll back. His body was starving for oxygen. Evelyn sat opposite them. She felt the heater blowing warm, perfectly filtered air across her face. She looked at the little boy's blue lips. She looked at his mother's torn, bleeding knuckles. Evelyn Harper had $3.8 billion in a portfolio of diversified assets. She had a team of world-class lawyers on retainer. She had a direct line to the governor of the state. But as she watched a 7-year-old boy suffocate because she hadn't bothered to carry a spare tire, Evelyn realized the absolute, humiliating poverty of her wealth. Money cannot force a child's lungs to open. She reached out, her trembling hand resting on Sarah's knee, not to comfort her, but because for the first time in her life, the billionaire needed to hold on to something real. "Breathe, Leo," Evelyn whispered, tears finally breaking past her iron composure. "Please, just breathe." They were 5 minutes away from the hospital, but in a severe asthma attack, 5 minutes is a lifetime. The armored Escalade did not park. It violently mounted the curb outside the emergency department of St. Jude Medical Center, its heavy tires screaming against the wet concrete. Before the vehicle even completely stopped, David Vance was out, throwing open the rear door. Sarah scrambled out into the freezing rain, clutching Leo. The boy's lips were no longer blue. They were an ash gray. He had stopped fighting. His small body was terrifyingly limp in her arms. The automatic doors slid open, and Sarah ran into the chaotic, overcrowded triage lobby. "Help!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. "He's not breathing! My son isn't breathing!" The triage nurse behind the thick plexiglass window looked up. She was overworked, underpaid, and bound by a rigid, unyielding system. She saw a woman in dirty, wet clothes. She saw the demographic of the uninsured. "Ma'am, you need to sign in," the nurse said, her voice a practiced drone of bureaucratic indifference. "I need an ID and an insurance card before I can generate a wristband." "He's dying," Sarah sobbed, leaning her full weight against the glass. "Please, just give him oxygen." "I understand, but I cannot dispatch a physician without a registered chart. It's protocol. Please step back and fill out the intake form. Protocol. The exact same kind of protocol that printed a neon orange eviction notice. A system built to process human suffering as data points on a spreadsheet. Then, Evelyn Harper walked through the sliding doors. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She moved with the cold, absolute certainty of a predator entering a new territory. She walked straight past the line of waiting patients, past Sarah, and slammed her open palm against the plexiglass window. The sound cracked like a gunshot over the murmur of the waiting room. The triage nurse blinked, startled. "My name is Evelyn Harper," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that instantly paralyzed the room. "My company holds the primary debt on this hospital's new surgical wing. If a pediatric trauma team is not standing in this lobby in exactly 5 seconds, I will personally ensure your medical license is revoked and this facility loses its funding by noon." The nurse looked at the tailored charcoal suit. She looked at the terrifying, unblinking eyes of the billionaire. She slammed her hand down on the red emergency override button beneath her desk. "Code Blue! Pediatric triage!" The intercom blared instantly. Within seconds, the double doors of the trauma ward burst open. 3 nurses and an attending physician rushed out with a crash cart. They didn't ask for insurance. They didn't ask for an intake form. They took one look at Leo's gray face and stripped the boy from Sarah's arms. They laid him flat on a gurney right there in the hallway. The procedural violence of emergency medicine took over. It was fast. It was brutal. "Severe anaphylactic-style bronchospasm," the doctor shouted, shining a penlight into Leo's unresponsive eyes. "O2 sat is dropping past 70. Draw 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine. Give it IM, right thigh, now." A nurse tore the thick wool sweater away from Leo's neck. Another plunged a syringe directly through his jeans into his thigh muscle. A third jammed a plastic oxygen mask over his small face, cranking the valve on the green tank until it hissed violently. Sarah was pushed back against the cold cinder block wall. She slid down to the floor, her hands covering her mouth, unable to look away, unable to breathe herself. 10 seconds passed, 15, and then a sound. It wasn't a wheeze. It was a sharp, violent, tearing gasp. Leo's back arched off the gurney. His eyes flew open in sheer panic as the epinephrine violently forced his airways open, shocking his heart into a frantic rhythm. He sucked in a massive, ragged breath of pure oxygen, then another, and another. The color flooded back into his face. The ash gray melted into a flushed, feverish pink. "O2 sat is climbing," a nurse called out, watching a portable monitor. 85, 90, he's stabilizing. Sarah let out a sound that didn't belong to any language, a primal, shattering cry of relief. She collapsed forward onto the linoleum floor, her forehead resting against the cold tile, her body shaking uncontrollably. Evelyn stood a few feet away, watching in complete silence. She watched the medical team wheel the stabilized boy into a private trauma bay. She watched the mother weeping on the dirty floor. And she watched the triage nurse, who was now staring at Evelyn with wide, terrified eyes. The immediate crisis was over. The boy would live. But as Evelyn looked around the sterile, unforgiving waiting room, a profound, sickening realization settled into her bones. She had saved the boy's life using her power, her name, and her money. But she hadn't fixed anything. If she hadn't been standing there, the protocol would have killed him, the exact same way the protocol of her real estate empire was currently destroying Sarah's life. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as it was designed to. It was designed to protect the wealthy and discard the poor. And Evelyn Harper was the chief architect of that exact system. A young billing administrator nervously approached Evelyn, holding a digital tablet. "Excuse me, Miss Harper?" The boy's chart. We still need an insurance provider to open the file. Evelyn looked at the administrator. She looked at the tablet. Put the entire pediatric floor on my personal account, Evelyn said smoothly, and find me a quiet room. I need to make a phone call. She turned away from the glass. It was time to dismantle the machine. The quiet room was a windowless administrative office on the second floor of the hospital. Evelyn Harper locked the door, sat at the empty laminate desk, and placed her phone on the table. She didn't call her banker. She didn't call her public relations team. She dialed the direct, unlisted number for Richard Sterling, Vanguard Horizon's Executive Vice President of Acquisitions. Sterling answered on the first ring. Evelyn, security told me about the car. Is everything? Pull the file on 412 East Alder Street, Evelyn interrupted. Her voice was absolute zero. Unit 3B, tenant name, Sarah Hayes. She heard the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard on the other end of the line. Sterling was a corporate assassin in a bespoke suit. He processed human displacement with the same emotional detachment as a math equation. I have it, Sterling said. Standard low-income acquisition. The property management subsidiary executed a 3-day notice to pay or quit this morning at 8 a.m. The unit is currently vacant and secured for demolition. Read me the ledger, Evelyn commanded. What was her actual debt? Sterling hesitated. He wasn't used to the CEO asking about granular street-level data. The outstanding balance was $1,850. I know the total, Richard. Break it down. What was her base rent? More clicking. Base rent was $900 a month. She fell 1 month behind. Evelyn closed her eyes. The nausea in her stomach wasn't from the stress of the morning. It was from the realization of how her own machine operated. She was exactly 1 month behind, Evelyn said, speaking slowly, tracing the horrific logic of the system. $900. So, where did the other $950 come from? Standard punitive structuring, Evelyn. You approved the model yourself 3 years ago, Sterling said, his tone defensive. $200 late fee, $400 legal processing fee, a mandatory property inspection fee, and a daily compounding penalty. Evelyn stared at the blank wall of the office. Sarah Hayes hadn't failed. She had been financially ambushed. Vanguard Horizon had weaponized a single missed payment, artificially inflating the debt until it became a mathematical impossibility for a woman making $14 an hour to ever catch up. What happened to her belongings? Evelyn asked. Her voice was dangerously quiet now. The sheriffs moved them to the curb per county protocol, Sterling replied smoothly. Our contractor's called City Sanitation. A garbage truck is scheduled to clear the sidewalk debris at 2 p.m. We want the perimeter clean for the bulldozers on Monday. Evelyn looked at the digital clock on the wall. 1:15 p.m., the cardboard boxes sitting in the freezing rain, the few pieces of clothing, and the rolled-up architectural blueprints, the magnificent, flawless designs for low-cost urban housing that Sarah had drawn in the dead of night. In exactly 45 minutes, all of it was going to be crushed in the back of a municipal garbage truck. Richard, Evelyn said. Yes, Evelyn. You are fired. Evelyn ended the call. She didn't wait for his reaction. She didn't care. She stood up, unlocked the door, and walked down the sterile corridor toward the VIP Pediatric Recovery Wing. Room 412 was a massive corner suite with a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. It had imported leather recliners, a private bathroom, and a massive flat-screen television. It was the kind of room Vanguard Horizon executives used when their children had their tonsils removed. Leo was lying in the center of the mechanical bed, fast asleep. An IV line fed fluids into his arm, and a clear plastic cannula delivered warm, humidified oxygen directly into his nose. His chest rose and fell in a slow, peaceful, effortless rhythm. Sarah was sitting in the leather recliner next to the bed. A nurse had brought her a fresh set of hospital scrubs to replace her soaked, muddy clothes. They had brought her hot coffee and a warm turkey sandwich. But Sarah hadn't touched the food. She was staring out the window at the gray, rain-soaked city. She was in a luxury medical suite, but her mind was on the wet concrete of Sector 4. She knew the brutal truth. The VIP room was an illusion. In a few hours, Leo would be discharged. And when they walked out of the sliding glass doors of the hospital, they would have absolutely nowhere to go. Evelyn opened the door and stepped inside. Sarah didn't turn around. She kept her eyes fixed on the skyline. "He's going to be fine," Evelyn said softly. "The attending physician said his lungs are clear. He just needs rest." "Thank you," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, empty. "For the ride, for getting us past the front desk." "I owe you my life," Evelyn said, stepping closer to the window. "A ride to the hospital doesn't balance that ledger." Sarah finally turned her head. Her tired eyes locked onto the billionaire. "There is no ledger, Ms. Harper," Sarah said. "You don't owe me anything. I made my choice on the highway. You made yours at the hospital. Now, I need to figure out how to keep my son from freezing to death tonight on a park bench. So, if you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls." Evelyn looked at the woman who had lost absolutely everything but refused to beg. "Your boxes are still on the sidewalk," Evelyn said. "City sanitation is coming for them at 2 p.m. Sarah flinched. The mask cracked. A flash of pure, terrified grief crossed her face as she thought about her architectural drawings being destroyed. Her last connection to her past. Her last hope for the future. "Stay here with Leo," Evelyn said, turning toward the door. "Do not leave this room." "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling for the first time. Evelyn paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I'm going back to Sector 4, Evelyn said. "I'm going to stop a garbage truck." The municipal garbage truck was reversing down the narrow street of Sector 4. Beep, beep, beep. The mechanical warning cut through the damp morning air. It was the synchronized soundtrack of a human life being officially erased. 2 sanitation workers in soaked orange vests jumped down from the rear steps. They weren't paid to ask questions. Their digital clipboard carried a direct order from Vanguard Horizon: clear all sidewalk debris outside of 412 East Alder Street. To them, the stack of waterlogged cardboard boxes and tightly rolled cylinders of thick paper weren't a shattered history. It was just garbage that needed to be thrown into the hydraulic crushing pit. The lead worker stepped toward the pile. He reached for the top box, the one where the bright neon orange eviction notice was still stuck to the flap. In that exact second, a heavy black Cadillac Escalade tore around the corner. The massive SUV didn't slow down. It violently swung its back end around, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. The driver slammed on the brakes, jackknifing the armored vehicle across both lanes, completely blocking the truck. The sanitation worker lunged backward as the heavy steel bumper stopped 2 feet from his legs. The truck driver slammed his horn, a deafening blast demanding the luxury vehicle move. The rear door of the Escalade swung open. Evelyn Harper stepped out into the freezing drizzle. She didn't use her security team as a shield. She walked straight past her guards, her tailored charcoal suit instantly soaking through, her expensive shoes sinking into the grimy water of the gutter. "Hey, lady!" the worker shouted over the diesel engine. "You can't park there. We're under court orders to clear this zone. Step back." Evelyn stopped 6 inches away from him. She didn't flinch at the stench of rotting trash. "Who signed your work order?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a freezing precision that made the worker's words catch in his throat. "The corporate landlord," the man stuttered. "Vanguard Horizon. Now move your car." Evelyn didn't move an inch. "I am Vanguard Horizon," she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the truck. "And if a single piece of cardboard enters the back of your vehicle, I will buy your entire sanitation company by noon just to personally sign your termination papers." The worker stared at the flawless cut of her suit, the predatory focus in her eyes, and the 4 armed guards forming a perimeter. He slowly raised his hands and stepped away. Evelyn turned toward Sarah's belongings. The drizzle had dissolved the cheap packing tape. Through a tear in the cardboard, she saw a child's winter coat and worn-out work boots. The physical inventory of a human existence, discarded on the concrete. But her eyes were drawn to the tightly rolled blueprint cylinders resting against the bottom box. The billionaire worth $3.8 billion slowly dropped to her knees on the filthy sidewalk. She didn't care that the greasy water was ruining her designer trousers. Her manicured fingers, hands that had signed multi-million-dollar takeovers, gently unrolled the wet paper. David Vance quickly stepped forward, holding a massive black umbrella over her head. Evelyn looked at the ink. These weren't amateur sketches. They were incredibly sophisticated, mathematically perfect architectural blueprints. Evelyn knew architecture. She had hired world-renowned urban planners, but what she held in her hands was different. It was alive. It was a master plan for the revitalization of Sector 4. Instead of soulless glass towers, Sarah Hayes had designed an interconnected ecosystem of affordable solar housing. It was built around human dignity. Communal green spaces, rooftop greenhouses, and structural windshields for pediatric play areas. At the bottom, written in precise script, Sarah Hayes, thesis presentation. The woman who designed the future of urban architecture had been loading pallets for $14 an hour. She had stood in freezing mud to save Evelyn's life, while Evelyn's company destroyed her home over an engineered late fee. Evelyn carefully rolled the blueprint back up, holding it against her chest. "Vance," she said, her voice dead calm as she stood up. "Yes, Ms. Harper. Load every single box into the vehicles, personally. If a single page is damaged, I will hold you accountable." Vance nodded. "Where are we transporting her belongings, ma'am? To a secure storage facility?" Evelyn looked up at the corporate skyline in the distance. Her eyes hardened into an expression of absolute, destructive resolution. "No," Evelyn said. "We are taking them to the corporate headquarters, straight to the executive boardroom." Vance paused. "Ms. Harper, the emergency board of directors meeting starts in 45 minutes. The institutional investors are waiting to launch the demolition phase." "Good," Evelyn whispered, a cold, ruthless smile appearing on her face. "Tell the press office to prepare a live broadcast. The demolition is canceled. I'm about to introduce the board to our new chief architect." The boardroom on the 72nd floor of Vanguard Horizon was a sanctuary of extreme wealth. The air was triple filtered. The noise of the city was completely erased. The single piece of polished mahogany that formed the conference table cost more than Sarah Hayes would earn in 20 years at the warehouse. 12 men sat around it: institutional investors, senior partners, executive vice presidents. Men who erase neighborhoods with the stroke of a titanium pen. Richard Sterling stood at the head of the table, a laser pointer in his hand. The massive digital screen behind him displayed the map of Sector 4. The entire block was shaded in bright red, the demolition zone. The heavy oak doors swung open. Nobody knocked. Evelyn Harper walked in. She hadn't changed clothes. Her tailored charcoal suit was soaked through and plastered to her skin. The expensive fabric was stained with freezing highway mud and black tire grease. Water dripped continuously from her hair onto the plush carpet. The billionaire CEO smelled of diesel exhaust, cold rain, and the desperate reality of the lower streets. Right behind her was David Vance, flanked by 4 armed security guards. They were carrying the wet, dissolving cardboard boxes. Vance stepped forward and placed the first filthy box directly onto the polished mahogany table. Murky, grease-stained water immediately pooled on the lacquered wood. A dead, paralyzed silence fell over the room. "Evelyn!" Richard Sterling lowered his laser pointer, blinking in sheer confusion. "What is going on? This is an emergency board meeting. What is that garbage?" "It isn't garbage, Richard," Evelyn said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, but it carried a lethal edge. It is the collateral damage of your flawless business model. She walked to the table and pulled the thick, waterlogged blueprint cylinder from inside her ruined jacket. This morning, Evelyn began, locking eyes with the investors. I nearly died on the highway during the storm. I was saved by a woman. She spent her last $20 in cash to buy a cheap jack. She knelt in freezing mud and bled so I could safely return to this glass tower. The board members exchanged bewildered glances. She sacrificed everything she had, Evelyn continued, her voice rising. And when she went home, our company threw her out onto the street, over an artificially inflated debt of $1,850. We put her life out in the rain, and her child nearly suffocated to death on the asphalt from an asthma attack. A senior investor, a gray-haired man in gold-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Evelyn, with all due respect to your ordeal, that is tragic, but it is standard legal procedure. We cannot halt a $1.5 billion project over a single eviction grievance. The bulldozers are warming up. We need to vote. Evelyn looked at him. She felt absolutely zero empathy for the men in this room. She unrolled the wet blueprints and slapped them down, directly on top of Sterling's printed financial projections. You are looking at the wrong numbers, Evelyn said. Look at this. The investors reluctantly leaned forward. Sterling frowned at the damp paper. This is a master revitalization plan for Sector 4, Evelyn stated. Designed by the exact same woman we crushed this morning, Sarah Hayes, a former architecture student who works the night shift loading pallets for $14 an hour. Sterling let out a condescending corporate scoff. Evelyn, you are in shock. These are the doodles of a warehouse dropout. We paid a New York firm $12 million for our designs. We don't build from the sketches of manual laborers. Evelyn slammed her palm onto the table. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The New York firm drew us soulless glass boxes, Richard, she fired back. They drew a dead zone. This dropout designed a self-sustaining ecosystem. She pointed to the meticulous calculations on the margins. Look at the math. Solar facade integration, rainwater harvesting. She solved the wind tunnel effect that cost us $10 million in lawsuits last year. She designed protected pediatric play areas and affordable housing that actually generates yield through energy efficiency. This is an architectural breakthrough that will rewrite the real estate market. The senior investor took off his glasses. Even if it's genius, Evelyn, we can't pivot now. The stock will plummet. The institutional funds will walk. The stock will burn to the ground when the press finds out Vanguard Horizon cynically tossed a dying child into the freezing rain the exact same morning his mother saved my life. Evelyn countered, her tone absolute zero. We have a choice. We become the corporate monsters on the evening news, or we become the pioneers of a new era in social architecture. We are launching the PR campaign tonight. Sterling paled. You can't unilaterally cancel a board-approved demolition. I will initiate a vote of no confidence. Evelyn slowly straightened up. Dirty water dripped from her sleeve. She radiated absolute crushing power. I personally hold 51% of the voting shares, Richard. I am the board. She turned to her security chief. Vance, escort Mr. Sterling out of the building. His severance is voided. If he comes within a mile of this tower, call the police. 2 armed guards stepped toward the vice president. Sterling opened his mouth, looked into Evelyn's eyes, and realized he was utterly destroyed. He walked out in silence. Evelyn looked at the remaining 11 men. Sector 4 is no longer a demolition zone. We are rebuilding it exactly to these blueprints. And I am appointing Sarah Hayes as chief architect, with full executive access to corporate resources. This meeting is adjourned. Room 412 in St. Jude Medical Center was entirely silent. Sarah Hayes sat in the leather recliner, her eyes fixed on the steady green line of the heart monitor. Leo's breathing was deep and peaceful. For the first time in 3 years, he was sleeping without the fear of suffocating. But Sarah couldn't rest. The brutal math of poverty was already running its calculations in her head again. She had no home. She had no car. The old sedan was sitting in a warehouse parking lot 30 miles away. She didn't even have money for a bus pass. In a few hours, the attending physician would sign the discharge papers, and she and her son would officially become a statistic on a city shelter waiting list. She looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were still raw and scraped from changing that tire in the dark. She had given everything she had left to a stranger, and in return, the system had chewed her up and thrown her to the curb. The quiet click of the door lock broke her thoughts. Sarah tensed, expecting an administrator with billing forms she could never pay. Instead, the heavy oak door swung wide open. David Vance, Vanguard Horizon's head of security, stepped into the room. He moved quietly, professionally. In his arms, he carried a waterlogged cardboard box, the exact one that had been stamped with the orange eviction notice this morning. The cardboard was soft from the rain, but it was intact. Vance carefully placed it in the corner of the room. Then he walked out and returned with a second box, then a third. Sarah stood up from her chair in absolute shock. She watched in silence as armed men in tailored suits quietly filled the luxury VIP suite with her meager worldly possessions. Her worn-out boots, Leo's old sweaters, her cheap kitchen utensils. Then, Evelyn Harper walked in. She no longer looked like a victim of the storm. She had changed into a dry, impeccably tailored black suit. Her posture held the exact same crushing authority she had used to dismantle the board of directors an hour ago. In her hands, Evelyn carried the thick paper blueprint cylinders. "My drawings," Sarah breathed, taking a step forward. Her voice trembled. It was the only thing in the world she had truly been terrified of losing. "The sanitation crew had only loaded one bag of trash before I blocked the street," Evelyn said, her voice even and precise. "Everything is here, down to the last box." Sarah looked from the cardboard to the billionaire's face. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked quietly. "You paid for this room. You saved my son. You brought my things. Are you trying to buy a clean conscience, Ms. Harper? If so, we're even. You can go back to your tower and bulldoze my neighborhood." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She walked to the bedside table and carefully laid the blueprints down. "I just came from the tower," Evelyn said, "and I came to tell you that we are not demolishing your neighborhood." Sarah froze. "I personally reviewed your eviction file," Evelyn continued, her tone hardening like steel. "The debt wasn't a failure on your part. It was engineered by my legal team through a system of punitive fines. It wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was an algorithm. My algorithm." Evelyn looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "You told me this morning that a home isn't just walls. It's people who don't walk past each other. Today, you didn't walk past me in the dark, and I will not walk past the machine that tried to destroy your life." She unrolled the top blueprint, the master plan for the Sector 4 solar housing community. "An hour ago, I called an emergency board meeting," Evelyn said, pointing to the flawless lines. "I fired the executive vice president of acquisitions. I terminated our contracts with the New York design firm, and I canceled the demolition. We are going to build this neighborhood, your way." Sarah couldn't breathe. The words felt like a hallucination. "I load pallets on a warehouse floor," Sarah whispered. "I don't even have a degree." "You have something far more valuable," Evelyn said firmly. "You have an understanding of how human beings are supposed to live. Vanguard Horizon is transferring these lands into a permanent affordable housing trust. I am appointing you as the chief architect of this project. Your starting salary will be $250,000 a year, plus a full corporate medical package that will cover the best pediatric specialists in the country for Leo." Sarah stumbled back into her chair. The tears she had been fighting back all morning finally broke through her defenses, spilling down her face. "Why?" she managed to ask. Evelyn Harper looked at the sleeping boy, watching his chest rise and fall in a perfect, effortless rhythm. Because sometimes, Sarah, to fix a broken system, you just need one person who is willing to stop in the dark. Your debt is cleared. Tomorrow morning, we start building. 5 years later. The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the newly completed Sector 4 architectural pavilion. The space didn't smell like wet cardboard or diesel exhaust anymore. It smelled of fresh concrete, cedar wood, and clean energy. Sarah Hayes stood at the central drafting table, a digital stylus in her hand. She was wearing a crisp white hard hat with the words Vanguard Housing Trust, Chief Architect, printed on the side. On the massive wall map behind her, the old dilapidated blocks of 412 East Alder Street were gone, but they hadn't been bulldozed into oblivion to make room for luxury penthouses. Instead, the neighborhood had been transformed into a sprawling, sunlit community of energy-efficient, solar-powered multi-family homes. The rents were permanently capped. The families who had lived there 5 years ago, the ones who used to watch evictions through the cracks in their doors, were still here. Only now they own their equity. The door to the pavilion clicked open. A 7-year-old boy ran across the polished floor, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings. It was Leo. He was healthy, his cheeks flushed with a vibrant, natural pink. He wasn't wheezing. He didn't have a rescue inhaler in his pocket. He was breathing perfectly, his lungs completely healed by the best pediatric specialists in the country, fully funded by the trust. Right behind him walked Evelyn Harper. She looked older, her silver hair catching the morning light, but the sharp, predatory intensity in her eyes had been replaced by something much softer, a quiet, profound peace. She had officially retired from corporate acquisitions 3 years ago, transferring her entire personal stake in Vanguard Horizon into Sarah's affordable housing fund. "Mom," Leo shouted, holding up a bright piece of paper. "Look what I drew in school today." Sarah smiled, taking the drawing from her son. It wasn't a typical child's doodle. It was a remarkably straight, detailed sketch of a playground with built-in structural windshields, the exact design feature Sarah had calculated on her kitchen table 5 years ago. "It's mathematically perfect, Leo," Sarah whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. "Just like your dad used to say." Evelyn walked up to the drafting table, resting a hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. The billionaire and the warehouse worker. 2 women who had been separated by a canyon of wealth, now bound together by a single night on a dark highway. "The final phase of the Alder Street complex opens today," Evelyn said softly, looking out the window at the vibrant community below. "The board wanted me to cut the ribbon, but I told them I'm no longer the architect of this company's future." Sarah looked at Evelyn, then out at the children playing in the sunlit courtyard. "We did it, Evelyn," Sarah said quietly. "We fixed the foundation." "No, Sarah," Evelyn corrected her, a tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek. "You fixed it. I just finally stopped my car to look at the walls. Let's look at the truth of this story. The system we live in is exact. It calculates debt, it enforces protocols, and it treats human lives like numbers on a corporate spreadsheet. It is designed to make us walk past each other, looking straight ahead, hiding behind our own security. But a home isn't just walls. It's a foundation built on the moments when we choose to stop, when we choose to spend our last $20 on a stranger in the mud, or when we choose to break the corporate machine to save a child's breath. So, I have 2 questions for you today. When was the last time you stopped to help someone when you had absolutely nothing to gain? And when was the last time you truly looked at the people you walk past every single day on your way to the top? Leave your answer in the comments below. Share this video with someone who gives without being seen. And if you want to see a world built on human dignity instead of corporate spreadsheets, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. You might be the single match that helps someone breathe through their darkest night. Thank you for watching, and remember, never walk past someone in the dirt, because you might just be saving the person who was meant to rebuild your entire world. Until next time, stay kind and stay human.